The Papa Jeff's America program is on the air, anytime, any device. PapaJeffUSA.com. Radio time from Houston, Texas, broadcasting around the country and around the world. Welcome to the Papa Jeff's America program. We're the talk radio podcast that discusses the stuff and things that you want to talk about. The talk radio podcast continuing the conversation, one podcast at a time. Inspiring guests, insightful commentary, and what would a day be without Papa Jeff's classic old guy humor, right? So, here's the guy that has trouble seeing the big E on the eye chart. The guy that some would say has a unique sense of humor, and the guy that definitely has a face for radio. Here's Mr. Here We Go himself, PG the OG, Papa Jeff. Welcome to Papa Jeff's America.
It is after 10 o'clock at Stereo 1220 WGAR, and it's one of my least favorite songs of 1976. Not because I don't like the record. I love the record. But my wife, after this record, and from then on, kept saying, "Steve, you're so dumb you couldn't find your booty with both hands." My wife is like that. I love it, though. Stereo 1220 WGAR. That is Casey of the Sunshine Band from 76. That is the souvenir year we're looking at in this hour of the Steve Cannon Show.
And there he goes. That's just a little clip of Steve Boom Boom Cannon back in the day when he was with Stereo 1220 WGAR in Cleveland, Ohio. Steve has spent his entire career in the broadcasting business, 45 plus years, and he's still going strong. Sometimes better known as the King of Trivia, and most recently as the host of the vintage radio show program Theater of the Mind. You can find that on WZMO-FM online, and we'll talk more about that later as well. He's a broadcasting treasure, and he's here to share some great stuff with us today. The Papa Jeff's America program, the talk radio podcast, continuing the conversation, one podcast at a time. Here's today's fun coffee fact. According to mentalfloss.com, the average American spends about $1,100 on coffee every year. Now, you'd think with spending that much money on coffee, we would be the world's most caffeinated nation on earth, right? Wrong. I know, I got it wrong too. Actually, Finland is the world's coffee capital. Even though Finland doesn't produce any of its own coffee beans, its citizens drink a lot of coffee, the most of any country in the world. And did you know that Beethoven was a barista's worst nightmare? The composer enjoyed his coffee and was extremely particular about its preparation. He insisted that each cup that he consumed be made with exactly 60 beans. All righty then. Hey, did you know that you can buy Papa Jeff a cup of coffee? It helps support the broadcast, and he doesn't care how many beans it's made with. Just click on the Buy Me a Coffee link at PapaJeffUSA.com because you know how much Papa Jeff loves his coffee. It's a sunny 84 degrees at the Talk OG studios in H-Town Space City, Houston, Texas. We're the city with no limits. We're Houston strong. Coming up after the break, a radio broadcasting legend, Steve Boom Boom Cannon. Next. The Papa Jeff's America program is on the air, anytime, any device. PapaJeffUSA.com. Hey guys, welcome back to the Papa Jeff's America program. Our guest today, you're going to love it, is Mr. Steve Cannon, better popularly known as Steve Boom Boom Cannon. He is with us today. He is in Pennsylvania, but mostly known for his career in radio in Ohio. Steve is a veteran radio broadcaster with over 45 years of experience to his credit, and I think that's amazing. And he's still doing it. Steve, I'm honored, sir. Welcome to the program. Thanks for coming on.
Well, I don't know if I would accept the word honor, but thank you for the kindness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You are a broadcast legend with 45 plus years. How did that all start?
Well, very honestly, I'm a suburban kid from Boston, Massachusetts, and my father would have liked me to be in business, but my mother said, leave him alone and let him do what he wants to do, because he will succeed at it. I know our son. At any rate, the fact of the matter was, I've always been interested in the entertainment business since I was a child. I remember I couldn't read the labels on records, but I would point at a record and my mother would buy it for me at the age of 4.
Wow.
And I remember the first record, I still have it somewhere in the house. The record was a 78 RPM recording of a song called Chicory Chick, which is a novelty song, but jazz singer Anita O'Day sings it with the Gene Krupa Band.
Okay. All right.
So, at any rate, I've had that interest for the longest time. Television became one of the things I loved to watch. Radio was one of the things I loved to listen to, and I admired the way those men and women did their job. Well, I tried business administration at one college. I tried psychology at another college, and 2 of my friends, Long John Wade from Philly and Don Wade, the morning man in Chicago, for years and years, were adolescent buddies of mine during my teenage years because they went to school with my neighborhood friend, Michael. So once I got to hang out with them, I realized how much fun radio was. I did a lot of things for a living. I was assistant manager at a King's department store.
Okay.
I was assistant manager trainee at a hardware store in my hometown of Brookline, Massachusetts. I drove a school bus. I drove a taxi. I drove a truck. I did a lot of things for a living during my late teens and early 20s. But suddenly I decided I want to go to broadcasting school and learn how to do it properly, because I really do find what the Wade brothers do as a fun way to make a living. The old adage about if you do something you like for a living, you'll never work a day in your life. You've heard that before.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So at any rate, I signed up for a broadcasting school. And while I was doing broadcasting school in mid-watch, as they called it in the Navy, I was driving bus and taxi during the day. I was going to school at 6 p.m. until 9 p.m. And then at 9, I would go over to WMEX, and I produced Jerry Williams' talk show. At the time, Jerry Williams was the king of talk radio in Boston and one of the originators of that kind of quote-unquote political talk.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of fell in love with it. Well, I'm at broadcasting school, and I'm on the school radio station practicing working the control board and being a DJ.
Mm-hmm.
A guy named Jack Bowman came into the school looking for a youngster to work at his radio station. And he heard me on the school station and hired me on the spot. And I never got to finish school. So I went to Berlin, New Hampshire, 75 or 100 miles south of Canada, and I did 7 to 11 playing Mantovani, Carmen Cavallero, good music, as they used to call it back in the old days. And that's where I started to get my chops, to learn what I was doing in radio.
Easy listening
doing it
with
at
Steve
the time
Cannon.
I was doing it.
Right,
now, one of the fun things about that particular job was the guy who was my PD was a guy named Johnny Moore. He was a Boston boy like me, but had moved up from Texas, where he worked, to Berlin, New Hampshire. So he was the program director and the hockey play-by-play guy, but he also did afternoon drive. So during the time the hockey team was on the road, Johnny didn't do afternoon drive. They moved me up to afternoons, and I filled in for him.
Great.
Now, one of the unique things about that period in radio and that small, I mean, really small town market, was the fact that for network news, there was a news network called the Yankee Network News Network, and it originated from Boston, but it broadcast to stations in New England, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, so forth and so on. So, at any rate, at 5 o'clock, I would run the Yankee Network News Network. At 5:05, the news director, who was also the sales manager, would write the news copy. I would do the local news. And then the water commissioner of the city of Berlin, New Hampshire, would come into the studio and he would read the news I had just done at 5:10, but he would do it in French.
Oh, okay.
In Berlin, New Hampshire, if you worked in a business on Main Street or Pleasant Street, the two main streets of Berlin, you had to be bilingual.
Okay.
You had to be able to speak both French and English. And what was really bizarre was going home at night, turning on the TV, and watching French television from Sherbrooke in Canada doing American game shows in French.
Interesting.
It was a really bizarre beginning. And that's really how the whole thing started for me.
That's great. It's brought you to where you are today. Where did the Boom Boom moniker, where did that come in?
Well, a long story, and I can deal in long stories. My buddy Arthur, one of the kids I grew up with in my neighborhood, and I were at a student hangout in Harvard Square. And we are getting a little schnockered, as we used to call it back in the day.
I remember that term.
And we were talking about the name I had been using I didn't like. And I said, I like the name Steve Cannon. So my pal Artie said to me, well, why don't you call yourself Steve Boom Boom Cannon? Because you're always shooting off your mouth anyway. And that's how the name happened. I won't mention his last name, but my buddy Artie at a boîte de nuit, if you will, like that French, in Harvard Square, Cambridge, Massachusetts. That's where I came up with the name Steve Boom Boom Cannon. And it stuck.
And it's stuck. Absolutely. I can relate back in with the paramedic service. That's where Papa Geoff came from. So, and it's stuck. And it's
well, that's not the only name I've had. One of the things about radio is the fact that sometimes when you work at a specific station, you sometimes have to use the name you're given.
Okay.
Now, I went into WFEA in Manchester, New Hampshire, with the name Steve Cannon. But the only jingle they had for the midday guy was a jingle that talked about a guy named Jim Long.
Okay.
So I wound up being the third Jim Long.
Okay.
Now, moving along, a fellow by the name of Brown hired me to work for his chain. One of his flagship stations was located in Gainesville, Florida. He hired me back again to work at his station in Spartanburg, North Carolina, WORD. The only jingle they had was Dan Alexander.
Okay.
So I then became Big Dan Alexander. I'm 6 feet tall. I'm not that big, but still, you know. Now, I also worked at a station with the call letters WSAR in Fall River, Massachusetts. And that was fun for me because I got to go home and live with my parents while I was making a decent living at a station 80 miles away.
There you
Well,
go.
okay. What they had was a jingle for a guy called the Great Scott. I was doing afternoon drive for them. I said, you can't just call me the Great Scott. I mean, how is somebody going to go, hey, great? Yeah, it's ridiculous. So
Yeah.
I want to be Frank Scott, the Great Scott.
There you go.
So he liked the idea and it worked for me. And that's the kind of thing that happened to a lot of guys who did radio when they were doing specifically top 40 radio, which was
Right.
basically what I did during the first 10 years of my career.
Yes, I have listened to several of your air checks, specifically Stereo 1220 WGAR in Cleveland. You had it going on, my friend. You really did. The Steve Cannon Show, the King of Trivia, the one jingle that I noticed specifically was the music is, and I should probably say it's not the same as, because the jingle on 70s on 7 on Sirius XM is the same as the music on that jingle for Stereo 1220 WGAR, and that caught my ear. So
Very honestly, jingles emanate from a pretty standard group of operations. And that's how jingles wind up sounding so much alike. There are companies who have jingle packages, and certain stations will elect to purchase that particular package.
mhm.
So that's how that happens.
So
Anyway.
you King of Trivia, and on one of those air checks, you specifically were that probably took quite a bit of research too, as well, right?
No, research. I'm a media freak.
Okay.
So, very honestly, listening and watching, I assimilated this information. And that's it.
So you became a trivia encyclopedia, that you had the recall that you could bring that back, and became the king of trivia.
To a degree. Now, there were times, as I moved along in my career, there were times when I believed some of the questions that I had been asking or dealing with were fairly pedestrian.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would do is I would then, once the internet became a reality, I would do additional research. I'd deal with topics I knew about, but I would expand that and dig deeper into the trivial aspects of these various programs and questions I had asked. But generally, it's off the top of my head.
There you go. I think sometimes that's the best stuff. I can have notes and bullet points and this, but sometimes, a conversation will just take a life of its own, or just, ad lib, I think, is sometimes some of the best stuff, for sure. Radio Rampage, talk radio for you did. You had a gig with the Ohio Lottery for a time, you had said.
No, actually not. I'm not sure how that came to be. My friend Bob Becker, who I worked with at WGAR in Cleveland, a really nice guy and a talented guy, he for many years hosted the Ohio Lottery show. And Bob has recently passed away. So an exchange between some of my buddies and I on Facebook dealt with the subject of the passing of Bob Becker. And we talked about the fact that he had done the Ohio Lottery for many, many years. And that's how that particular topic came up. And you might have misunderstood what I typed on Facebook, because although I consider myself relatively literate when it comes to putting it down on paper, sometimes I screw it up. So my apologies.
No. I definitely know that feeling. Well, things for you today are, you're on WZMO, and you do a program called Theater of the Mind. Tell us about that.
It's hard to really explain this. One of the nicest guys in the world I ever worked for was a guy by the name of George Yoakum. George Yoakum and I came together when Susquehanna Broadcasting transferred me into WHLO in Akron, Ohio. And George and his wife, Chris, and my Linda and I got very close. So George and I had stayed in touch. At any rate, he eventually, when I had moved away from Susquehanna Broadcasting, I found out that George had moved to Marion, Ohio, and taken over one of the major stations the major station in that market. Full service, adult contemporary, the news, the weather, the music, the talk. It was one of those stations and ruled the market for years and years.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he had taken over the station. So once I had retired, he and I stayed in touch. And as a result of me getting hooked up with another guy who was a listener of mine, who now had an LP station in Marion, I got to know another LP owner in Marion, Ohio, by the name of Tom Kennedy. Well, Tom and George knew each other. And once I had left the original guy, Scott Spears, Tom contacted me and wanted me to come with his station if I would, in fact, be available. And being the king of trivia, self-proclaimed though I may be, he thought the idea of me being the host of Theater of the Mind would be a good idea. Now, it was originally called Old Time Radio, Old Radio, yada, yada, and I was not really a fan of that handle. I believed that these classic radio programs, comedy, science fiction, mystery, drama, and westerns, were more theater of the mind by virtue of the fact that you have to create the images in your mind, as opposed to staring at a screen to see them depicted for you. So Tom and I agreed that changing the name of the show to Theater of the Mind was a really good idea. And with the pandemic coming on, I had presented for at least a year the fact that I believed that families should sit around their radio, as they did during the 30s and 40s, and present this kind of media to your children as your parents may have presented it to you. And it worked. It's going very, very well. As a matter of fact, if I may, you can get WZMO 104 FM in Marion, Ohio, online by going to WZMO 1047, Marion, Ohio. Go to their website, click on Listen Live at 2:05 and 10 p.m. daily, and you will be able to hear my Theater of the Mind show. It's no big deal, but it's a lot of fun to listen to. And I think you'd like, well, for instance, coming up next week, the old Lum and Abner comedy show. That was a 1935 epic that went all the way into the 50s. Science fiction. I don't think you've ever heard of The Mysterious Traveler, but that was a sci-fi mystery show. And I'm running a program from 1946 next week. On Mystery Wednesday, we changed the format just a bit. There was a 15-minute show called Firefighters that dealt with the real-life episodes in the lives of firefighters, much like Jack Webb's TV show Emergency.
Right.
On Drama Thursday, the show that was originally called Challenge of the Yukon. Now, for us who are a little bit older, we may remember the television show called Sergeant Preston of the Yukon. So that's going to be my drama show. And on Western Friday, William Conrad will star in the role he originated on radio. Matt Dillon, U.S. Marshal, in Gunsmoke.
Love it.
So that's the kind of thing that we're doing on Theater of the Mind. And it allows you and the family to sit and listen and create images of what you think you're listening to in your own mind. And therein lies the title, Theater of the Mind.
I think that's awesome because it does let you use your mind for different things other than just staring into your phone or another device. And I think that's amazing. That can bring family together and just give another option of things that are going on. And we are definitely going to put the link to that in our show notes so folks will be able to find that. Theater of the Mind, 104.7 WZMO online. And that's great. We're definitely going to do that.
Oh, by the way, speaking of trivia, one of the trivia questions I asked some years ago. The Italian director Bernardo Bertolucci made a somewhat controversial film. And it was with Marlon Brando, and there was butter involved. Do you remember the name of that film?
I must admit, I do not.
The Last Tango in Paris. And I will not describe the scene I'm referring to on your show because it's fairly graphic, but it was a highly controversial movie.
Folks will have to go find it for themselves, and The Last Tango in Paris and the unspeakable butter scene.
Yes, absolutely.
What's next for Steve Cannon? You've got your hands full with Theater of the Mind. It sounds like it's going great guns, so to speak, another aged term. But is there anything new on the horizon for Steve Boom Boom Cannon?
Not at this particular point, although very honestly, if anyone would like to, anybody who is connected to an LP FM station would be interested in the idea of an LP network, contact me on Facebook. That's about the only thing at this particular point I'm working on, although I would love to go back and do another 2-hour talk show.
Yeah.
Over the years, I've had the opportunity to talk to some of the most interesting and famous people in the entertainment business, both by telephone and in person, and in front of a live audience as well. And I loved doing that and would like very much to be able to do that again.
Well, it's very apparent that you enjoy what you do, and the voice is still there. I'll tell you, it's definitely the radio voice, and I certainly appreciate it. We will put the links in the show notes of how they can find Theater of the Mind and also how they can contact you on Facebook. The last conversation I had before we did our recording today was actually with a friend in the UK, and we are looking at putting together a collaboration. He is working with several LP radio stations, and we were talking about collaborations and networking. So I'm definitely going to speak to him and probably send him your way as well. Steve Cannon, thanks so much for coming on the show. We hope you'll come back and see us. We appreciate you. You're doing great. Be well, my friend. Thanks again.
Well, thank you for asking. I've kind of enjoyed this. And as you may have noticed, I am sort of a wind-up kind of guy. You put the key in my back, you wind it up tight, and I talk forever. Maybe that's why I did so well in talk radio.
That's why you did what you did, and you're a natural. You're absolutely a natural. And
one of the things that I, over the years, had a tendency to originate was a phrase called wind-up interview. And one of the reasons why I used that phrase was because that is how I classified a man who I got to know in his later years by the name of Robert Stack.
Mm-hmm.
You would ask Robert Stack a question on the radio, and he'd do 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So I called him a wind-up interview.
Like you said, just put the key in their back, wind them up, and, out it comes. And that's great.
Papa Geoff, continued success. Thank you so much for asking me to be part of your program.
Thank you, my friend. Definitely appreciate it. And we will definitely see you again. Guys, this is the Papa Geoff's America program. We are the Talk Radio Podcast, continuing the conversation one podcast at a time. joining us today for the Papa Jeff's America program. Check out more episodes of the Talk Radio podcast at papajeffusa.com. You can subscribe through the link on our website or wherever you get your podcasts. We're on all the major platforms. papajeffusa.com is your home for everything Papa Jeff. Anytime, any device. And while you're there, you can check out more episodes of the broadcast, check out the OG Corner, get in contact with us, and you can easily link to all of our social media. We do want to hear from you. Your thoughts, comments, and suggestions are what make this program happen. So send us an email on our website, papajeffusa.com. Please help us to get the word out and share our broadcast on all of your social media, because sharing is caring. And speaking of caring, if you'd like to help us coffee up here at the Talk Radio Podcast, give a click to the Buy Me a Coffee link. You know how much Papa Jeff loves his coffee. Hey guys, remember to wear a mask if you're going out. Practice that social distancing. Wash your hands frequently. Get the vaccine when it's your turn. And let's all do the right thing and take care of each other. Remember, disagree doesn't mean dislike. We're all in this together. Thanks again for joining us, and bring a friend with you next time. We're looking forward to seeing you next time on the Talk Radio Podcast, continuing the conversation, one podcast at a time.